Jung did this in 1926. It was at one of his seminars. It was his model of the psyche as he envisioned it when he was not so exclusively focused on individuation as in his later years. He imagined the psyche as having various depths in the great sea of the unconscious, from the most personal at the top to the most impersonal at the lowest depths. You'll see the central fire is H, and that's what I was trying to evoke in my image of being sort of at the heart of the discovery of evolution at the Galapagos. The individual psyche is a small part of a much bigger and deeper psyche that has many levels. At the surface, the psyche starts with the individual and its ego. From there, as one goes deeper and deeper, the psyche moves from the individual to family, to clans, to nations, to even larger groups such as Europeans or Asians, to primitive ancestors, to animal ancestors, to what Jung called the central fire, the force of life itself that energizes all of psyche. Remember, this is Jung's vision of the psyche, not of biology or geology, and how psyche participates and originates in each of these many layers. As Jung envisioned it, each one of us in this room and everyone participating by the webinar from many different places around the world has such a psyche with its levels descending to the origin of life itself. All of these levels of the psyche can be triggered by such important events as a U.S. presidential election, which touches every individual's concern about his or her own identity and security, to the well-being of life itself on the planet, from Medicare and Social Security to taxation, jobs, and gender equality to foreign relations, global warming, and the exponential acceleration of the extinction of species on the planet. Interestingly enough, I discovered in my preparation for today that a wave is set in motion not by the actual movement of individual water molecules, which move mostly vertically rather than horizontally, but by the transfer of energy from one water molecule to another. We can think of this transfer of energy as what happens to the collective psyche when it is activated. Almost all the information we get is either packaged before we see it or spun instantaneously when we do see it. Hardly had the first debate ended than I realized I was being told what I thought before I even had a chance to think about it. Spin becomes the message in the same way that more than 40 years ago Marshall McLuhan told us that the media was the message. Spin contributes to an infectious climate of hypervigilance and suspicion. Look at the ears and eyes, both in the head and in the body. It may be a little hard to make out this image, but big ears, big eyes, and a serpentine tongue, and the body is made up of big ears and eyes. This is our rumor beast. In my opinion, it poisons the collective psyche, as toxic to the psyche as mercury is to the body. Spin is the name of the game on both sides of the divide, whether one is reading Huffington Post or listening to Rush Limbaugh or watching Fox TV or MSNBC. Since first seeing this amazing image, it is hard for me not to see this face every time I listen to what has been described as talking heads, the chattering class, the Sabbath gas bags, and the expectorate, those who raise and lower our expectations. They pollute our radio, TV, internet, newspapers, magazines in an effort to create a Super Bowl-like atmosphere of a tight race that generates ever-increasing excitement and revenue. Even as I stand here today, that I fear I have joined the ranks of the talking heads and am contributing to A. Paul Weber's monstrous image. The image portrays a population literally being sucked out of its individual spaces. I'm not sure if you can see it, but people are falling out of their apartment windows into this monster. They become the monster that snakes its way through the community, adding its own eyes, ears, and tongues to the beast that grows itself through the mesmerized contribution of every individual citizen that is sucked into its orbit.
The three main figures I want to talk about in terms of how an individual can experience and benefit from political extremism are Jung representing the West, Sri Aurobindo representing an Eastern perspective, And finally, a figure you may not know as well, Ibn Arabi, who is from the Middle East. Actually, he was from Spain originally, but settled in Persia and Turkey. And we'll learn about Ibn Arabi primarily through the work of Henri Corbin. All three of these people faced difficult circumstances politically. Sri Aurobindo was on trial for his life. Jung was fearful he might lose his mind. And Ibn Arabi lived at a time when mystics could be beheaded. So here's an image of Henri Corbin with Jung at the Eranos conference. I'd be curious, how many of you have heard of Corbin and are interested in him? Well, that's heartening. I'm glad to know. And we'll be talking a little bit about their respective approaches to individuation, because there are a lot of similarities and there are some important differences. I'll just conclude by saying that within the mundus imaginalis, the Sufi mystics talk about there being an orientating goal, a point of reference, which is sometimes called the symbols of the north. It's the celestial pole. In spiritual language, it's the absolute. And I think it's an enormous contribution to Jungian psychology, because it takes into account the fact that the self, the ultimate goal of the psyche, is connected to something spiritual, which we can say is beyond psyche and beyond world. And so I have an imaginary meeting of Jung and Henri Corbin in the spirit world as Elijah representing Jung and Hutter as Corbin. And Jung says the world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. And in my imagination, Corbin replies, yes, and the human psyche hangs on a thin thread, which is the celestial pole of the mundus imaginalis.